במשך מאות שנים אנטישמיות הייתה תופעה אירופאית. למעשה האירופאים המציאו אותה, כן? שנאת ישראל, רצחנו את ישו, והם העמיקו אותה והעמיקו אותה ופוגרום ואחרי פוגרום, ובסוף היא הגיעה לממדים הגזעניים החילוניים של תורת הגזע. אבל בשנים האחרונות יש שיפט מאוד מאוד גדול לעולם מוסלמי. והיום הרציניים ביותר בתפיסה האנטישמית הם המוסלמים, וקטר לוקחת חלק מאוד מאוד משמעותי בזה, כאשר היא בעצם דוחפת דרך תרומות מטורפות, אג'נדות פרו-מוסלמיות, אנטי-מערביות, אנטי-יהודיות, ממש אנטישמיות בקמפוסים ברחבי ארצות הברית ואירופה. בסקר שערך מכון איסגאפ, שבעצם מתעסק באיך למגר ולהבין את האנטישמיות הגלובלית, הם הבינו שקטר עד עכשיו שמה מעל 100 מיליארד דולר במוסדות כאלה ברחבי אירופה וארצות הברית. והדבר הזה בעצם הוא מדהים, כי קטר קונה פקולטות שלמות, בעצם מחליטה מי ירצה בפקולטות, מי לא ירצה, מה הסילבוס, עד כדי כך שהנשיא טראמפ אמר לפני שבועיים את הדבר הבא. הרווארד, שזה באמת אחד המוסדות שקטר באיזשהו מקום קנתה, בוודאי בפקולטות של המזרח התיכון, היא מוסד אנטישמי ושמאל קיצוני, וכמו רבים אחרים, כי יש עוד הרבה מוסדות כאלה, שמתקבלים אליו סטודנטים מכל רחבי העולם שרוצים לקרוע את ארצנו לגזרים, והרעיון הליברלי, הפרו-אמריקאי, הוא רעיון שזר מאוד להרווארד. הוא אומר, המקום הוא בלגן ליברלי שמאפשר לקבוצה מסוימת של מטורפים משוגעים להיכנס ולצאת מהכיתה ולהרעיף כעס ושנאה מזויפים. אז הדבר הזה הוא מהג'רוזלם פוסט, ואני גם אעשה רפרנס, ואני אעשה קישור בתיאור הסרטון. אז עם מי דיברתי היום? אני דיברתי עם הבעל הבית והמייסד של איסגאפ, שזה בעצם המכון שמתעסק בדברים הללו. אז איסגאפ זה ה-Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. והבעל הבית שלו זה פרופסור צ'ארלס סמול, שהוא יהודי קנדי, ומי שנמצא אצלהם בבורד זה נתן שרנסקי, ומי שהיה זה אלי ויזל, והם בעצם מתעסקים בפרויקט מאוד גדול שנקרא Follow the Money. איך מדינות מוסלמיות, ובייחוד קטר, שופכות מאות מיליארדים, ממש עשרות מיליארדים של דולרים, כדי לשנות את השיח האקדמי באירופה ובארצות הברית, ואיך הם הצליחו, ואפשר לראות שהם הצליחו בתגובה של האוניברסיטאות ב7 באוקטובר, ב8 באוקטובר וב9 לאוקטובר, שזה היה ממש מטורף. אז דיברנו עם פרופסור צ'ארלס סמול, על מה הוא חושב שניתן לעשות, איך הדבר הזה קורה, ולמה, מה בעצם באמת מניע את קטר. שלום וברכה לכולם, לי קוראים רועי יוזביץ, ובערוץ הזה אני מדבר עם המוחות הגדולים ביותר בעולם, שיחות מרתקות. אם השיחה הזאת מעניינת אתכם, אתם מוזמנים גם לעשות לנו לייק, לעשות סאבסקרייב, כי אז האלגוריתם של יוטיוב ידע להביא את השיחה הזאת לעוד אנשים מעניינים כמוכם. אתם רוצים לתמוך בנו, אתם יכולים לעשות את זה דרך כפתור הסופר thank you, אוקיי? אתם לא חייבים לעשות על 6 שקלים, אתם יכולים לעשות על הרבה יותר, וזה יעזור לנו, כי אף אחד לא תומך בערוץ הזה חוץ מהקהל הנאמן שלי. ומי שרוצה עוד יותר לתמוך, יכול להיכנס לדף הפטריון שלנו, וממש לתמוך בצורה חודשית, ובשבועות הקרובים גם אנחנו נעלה לשם שיחות של זוגיות שלי ושל רלי, שיהיו רק לאנשי הפטריון, ועוד כל מיני הפתעות, כולל מפגשים, גם וירטואליים וגם לא וירטואליים, רק לאנשי הפטריון. ועכשיו, פרופסור צ'ארלס סמול. What do we really know about anti-Semitism? Is it primarily a Christian Western phenomenon or a Muslim one? And in today's climate, can we say that anti-Semitism has essentially become an anti-Western, making it closely connected to the rise of the woke movement? And how and why all of this is also connected to Qatar? My guest today is an expert in the field. His name is Professor Charles Small. He is the founder and director of the Institute for Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, which is ISGAP. According to Wikipedia, ISGAP produces academic research, seminar, conference dedicated to the study of antisemitism, and in recent years, it has particularly focused on the rise of antisemitism on university campuses. Professor Charles Small, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
It is also my honor. Can we conduct this interview in Hebrew because you're Israeli Canadian or no?
No, my Hebrew is not that great. I wish I could.
Okay, so with your permission, let's start. I imagine that since October 7th, sadly, your workload has skyrocketed. And my first question is, did you ever think that studying anti-Semitism would feel less like an academic research and more like an emergency response?
To be honest, yes, I did. I remember vividly, I was living in Jerusalem in the 1990s and 1996, and I was sitting in my study in my little apartment in Rehavia, and I was studying at the time neoliberal globalization and the impact on culture. And I remember, I went to good universities. I was at McGill, University of London, Oxford, and I studied politics. And I heard of the Muslim Brotherhood, but I never really studied them. And I was looking at neoliberal globalization and how in globalization, the idea was for the state to become more weak, to recede. And there was a belief that if there was a free market system, that with free market systems, there'd be more economic development. And with more economic development, there was a belief that there'll be more democratic practice, more democratic culture. So the state was weakening, and that means less intervention in healthcare, education, transportation, housing, which in Western democratic social democracies, the state was providing a lot of subsidies. So on the one hand, the state was withdrawing. And then I started to read about the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, like the neoliberals, they wanted to destroy the state because they saw the state as a vestige of Western imperialism and colonialism. So on the one hand, you have the Muslim Brotherhood trying to destroy the state. On the other hand, you have the G7, G8 countries trying to weaken the state. And I was sitting in my apartment in Rehavia, and I realized that we have actually seen this film before. And during the interwar period between World War I and World War II, the dislocation, the economic and political dislocation, the failure of political institutions, the failure of the state, there were many marginalized people throughout Europe. And this was the breeding ground. This was the exact political environment where people were so marginalized from economic and political institutions and processes that we saw the rise of extreme political movements and authoritative figures, and people were attracted to these parties and individuals who had easy answers to the problems. And I remember that I started becoming very concerned because the Muslim Brotherhood, in their ideology, as I know you know, they take European anti-Semitism, the protocols of the elders of Zion, and even fascism, which led to the Shoah. These are the words and ideas that led to the Shoah. And they fuse it with a very narrow, perverted notion of Islam. And when I started to study the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1990s, I became very concerned, given neoliberalism and globalization on the one hand, and radical Islam on the other. And this actually led me to really start to focus my research on anti-Semitism in the 1996 onwards. And then in 2002, 2003, with a small group of professors, we started ISGAP because we began to understand that anti-Semitism was rising given the economic, political, and cultural processes that we were living through.
I think this is fascinating, and we had two episodes on our podcast regarding the Green-Red Pact, the pact between the Muslim world and the communists and the woke movement, and how the two very different, notoriously different agendas can combine. If the dog and the cat wants to cooperate, it is to kill the chef. And I think the Green-Red Pact is an extremely important. Could you please elaborate on in 2 minutes what is the main focus of ISGAP, and are you only researchers or do you also advocates or lobbyists?
Right. So we're ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, is a high caliber research center. We exist in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Israel. Our leadership is Natan Sharansky is our chair. Our founding president was Professor Elie Wiesel, Natan is our chair. We work with Seema Vaknin-Gil. She's our managing director. She was a former head of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel. She was a brigadier general in the Israeli Air Force Intelligence. David Harris, who was the former head of the American Jewish Committee. He's also on our leadership team. And Michel Gelprin. We have 80 research fellows from around the world as part of our team. We have a research center at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. We have a summer institute now going into our 12th year at Oxford University, where we train professors. We help professors to create courses and curriculum on contemporary anti-Semitism studies. We have a postdoctoral training program. We have postdocs in Cambridge, at McMaster University in Ontario, at the University of Pennsylvania, UPenn, in the United States. We're opening a center at INSS, at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, where we'll have 3 postdocs there. We are starting an academic journal called the Journal of Alterity, the Journal of Otherness, the ethics and politics of being the other. We have book series, so we're a high caliber research center. But given the crisis of anti-Semitism, the explosion of anti-Semitism, especially after October the 7th, our goal is to take the best minds, the best experts in the world to map, decode, and fight anti-Semitism. And I think some of the best minds could really understand, what's happening and why it's happening. And we take our research and we try to impact policy. So we have many research projects, but our primary research project is called Follow the Money, where we're looking at the impact of the Red-Green Alliance and the funding of the Muslim Brotherhood. Imagine the Muslim Brotherhood that wants to destroy America, wants to destroy the West, wants to destroy Israel. They're funding American universities and universities all over the world with billions and billions of dollars. So we're looking at this and we're trying to raise awareness in the world of policy and academia of this crisis.
Now, before we focused on dive into this Muslim follow the money thing, which is horrific, under which umbrella would you consider the study of anti-Semitism? I will give an example. Historically, anti-Semitism was a European phenomenon, so there were European historians like Dina Porat. But nowadays, the cutting edge of anti-Semitism is Muslim. Or so, do you also include a Middle Eastern professor or Orientalist as part of your think tank, of your research center, in order to understand more the concept of Muslim anti-Semitism?
So ISGAP is an interdisciplinary research center. So we have professors from Middle East studies, from history, from economics, sociology, law schools, scholars of literary criticism.
Mhm.
We work with experts in the ideology of anti-Semitisms with an S, from the Muslim Brotherhood to radical Christian anti-Semitism to white supremacy and racist anti-Semitism. We work with forensic accountants, experts in terror financing, who understand the money flow. So it's interdisciplinary and trying to really understand how anti-Semitism, as Professor Elie Wiesel always taught us, that anti-Semitism it begins with the Jewish people, but it never ends with the Jewish people. That it's not a parochial problem for Israel or the Jews, but it's symbolic, or it's sort of the early warning system of something more deep that's happening in our society.
Okay. Now, to me, I have 2 very important questions regarding your work about Qatar. One is why Qatar, and the other is why investigating the academia. So, with your permission, let's start with the second question, and let me elaborate. Now, one can see that you can also investigate the Qatari media. For example, Al Jazeera. A lot of people talk about how terrible Al Jazeera in Arabic is, and maybe it's better in English, but Al Jazeera Plus is just terrible, and it promote and inject anti-Semitism to so many houses around the world. And you decided to focus on academia, but it seems to me that the Qatari media, Al Jazeera primarily, is also very good or very important source of anti-Semitism. So my first question is, why not also focused on the Qatari media?
So we look at Qatar, and one of our projects is actually looking at the issue of FARA. Foreign entities need to be registered in the United States, and we're trying to get Al Jazeera to be registered as a foreign agent in the United States. And there was some rulings that they have to register, but they haven't. So we're actually doing research on the work of Al Jazeera in the United States, but around the world. So I think first we have to look at the Qatari regime. Qatar is a country of less than 350,000 citizens. It's a tiny country, but it's a very wealthy country. The royal family of Qatar has a bayah. I know in Hebrew a bayah is a problem, which is a good word, but in Islam, bayah also means a spiritual oath. So the royal family of Qatar has a spiritual oath to the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. They follow all of the religious edicts, rulings, and fatwas of the Brotherhood. So, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood, which was led by Yosef Qaradawi for many decades, he recently passed away. But Qaradawi preached his entire life that the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. Okay, this is the Brotherhood. So the raison d'etre, the core element of the Brotherhood, not the extreme wing or the military wing of the Brotherhood, takes the protocols of the elders of Zion, the words and ideas that led to the Shoah, and fuses it with Islam, and also Nazism and fascism. And this is the rabbis of the royal family of Qatar are the Muslim Brotherhood. They want to distance Israel from the West and from the United States, to isolate and weaken Israel, to destroy it. They want to murder Jews and finish the work of Hitler. This is their stated core element. And if you read the Hamas charter and other elements of the Muslim Brotherhood, we see this very clearly. So the Jews in Israel are the little Satan. America and democracy are the big Satan. And we know strategically that they want to move Israel away from the West to destroy it, but also to use anti-Semitism to weaken and fragment the United States of America to destroy the big Satan. This is the Qatari regime. This is what Qatar is doing. But Qatar, being a wealthy country, they know if they use soft power, if they use their influence, they will help to hasten the weakening and destruction of democracies around the world and to replace it with an Islamic caliphate. And what they're doing now in our Follow the Money project, we're focusing on higher education. We found, with our amazing team of forensic accountants and experts in terror financing and in the Brotherhood, we found up to $100 billion that this tiny country of Qatar, with less than 350,000 citizens, are giving to American universities. So this Qatar, this tiny country, is giving more money to American universities than any other country in the world. So why would they do this? And it's clearly to influence academia. And the enemies of democracy know that perhaps the most important institution in a democracy is higher education, because this is where young people learn to be citizens. Influence higher education, you influence the society in 1 or 2 generations. And we know for the past 30, 40 years that higher education in the United States, but also in Canada and other European democratic countries, is becoming increasingly anti-Semitic and anti-democratic. And we saw this on October the 7th, 30 years of teaching at the best universities in the West about Jews and Israel and Zionism led to the encampments, and from the encampments to the streets. And we've seen on October the 9th, which was the Monday morning after October the 7th, this explosion of anti-Semitism in our campuses across the Western world as a direct result of the funding of the Muslim Brotherhood-inspired Qatar. And we in the West, also in Israel, have underestimated or ignored for some money the implications and the power of ideology. And now we're waking up to a crisis, not only in terms of anti-Semitism, but I think in terms of democracy and democratic principles in our best universities around the world. And as you said earlier, also in the media.
So from Qatar's perspective, this was money well spent. October the 7th
Absolutely.
absolutely proved that this was money well spent. And the idea was not just giving money to faculties, build new buildings, but to make sure that you hire the right people. And my question is, how far or how deep the intervention in Qatar in the campuses themselves. So do do they make decision about the syllabus, about the lecturers, about events in the campus, or this is just money given and Qatar hope that they will get the message and just be aligned with.
I think it's a mixture of both. Sometimes the involvement of the Qataris into changing, creating institutes. So, for example, there's 6 universities, American universities, that have campuses in Qatar. Places like Georgetown, Cornell University. Cornell University, we found 10 billion with a B dollars that the Qataris gave to Cornell. They just signed a new contract with Georgetown University. And in these universities, they have medical schools and engineering schools, but also Middle East studies programs that they fund. At Georgetown, they fund the most important diplomatic training program in the world. So they're influencing the State Department through soft power. So, so it's a combination of direct intervention and demonizing Israel and pushing an agenda in the Middle East, but a lot of it is also soft power. And I use the example, we have a small research center at Cambridge University, and our total budget is about, $450 to $500,000 a year. And we study anti-Semitism, and we have a very good relationship with the university. They've been very supportive. But they know, and we know, if they would impose, let's say they want a new professor or a new director of our program that wants Israel to be destroyed, right? We would walk away. This would be the end of our working relationship. But because we have a little bit of soft power, we have good relations, and we're slowly expanding, and the environment is good. Could you imagine if I went to Cambridge with $10 billion and said, I'll fund professors and programs and fly them around the world first class? My power at Cambridge would be massive. And we know that Qatar is buying universities, they're buying media, they're influencing social media. Qatar also has the most important American military base in the Middle East, in Qatar. So they have a lot of influence in Washington. They have a lot of influence in higher education and the media. They're buying cultural institutions. They're buying sports franchises. So they're using soft power, and on the one hand, they're seen as an ally of the West, and on the other hand, they're pushing the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And we know now, post October the 7th, their engagement in Gaza, their engagement with Hamas, the fact that they house the leadership of Hamas and continue to do this. They have, there's two faces to Qatar, and we need to understand their ideological and political agenda.
Even in Israel, we have a Doha Stadium, even in Israel. Okay. Now, with your permission, Charles, I would like to zoom out a little bit because we discussed the academia and you gave outrageous numbers like 100 billions. Okay. And there is a very interesting question that it seems that nobody discusses this all. Is Qatar buying off Western politicians? Now, in the UK, you can't help but notice the Islamic influence on the policy, on politics. It's not just street violence. It is also the highest level of British politics on the Labour Party, but not just the Labour Party, also the conservative politics. But in America, nobody's talking about the influence of Qatar on American politics. Now, if Qatar is investing $100 billion of American dollars in academia, isn't it obvious that it also investing, I don't know, 10 times, but at least the same number in American politicians? And why is nobody talking about the Qatari influence on American politics?
It's a great question, and it's a very important issue, and they're definitely involved. I spoke at a Senate hearing 3 weeks ago on anti-Semitism in the United States, and there was a Republican senator from Kansas who was very critical of Qatar until 2019 when he went to Qatar and became friends with the emir. And he came to the hearing and he attacked me and my research center for being anti-Qatar. And he literally repeated the talking points of the Qatari embassy in Washington. So here's somebody that is clearly, and we now know, we did some research, clearly paid by the Qataris to influence policy in the Senate. We know that they're working with senators in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Yeah, and they're definitely involved in politics in Washington. I remember I gave a talk in Washington at a very important think tank about 2 weeks after the October 7th in 2023. And I was speaking about anti-Semitism, and there was a lot of concern, and the room was very warm and welcoming and supportive. So I was speaking about anti-Semitism, and then I started speaking about the influence of Qatar, and you can see the body language in the room shifted, and the environment changed, rapidly. So yeah, they have a lot of influence in politics in the United States. Our research is looking at their international network and their financial network and how they're using different entities, financial entities, banks, foundations, political entities, community organizations to influence societies in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Italy, throughout Europe, in Canada, in parts of Africa. So yes, there's a concerted effort to undermine democratic principles by the Qataris. Absolutely.
I think the mayor of London or the prime minister of the UK, just after October 7th, said many very concrete bad things about Qatar, but then he got a visit from the prince, and he just 180 degrees. He shifted, I think, almost everything. It was said that Qatar is holding the entire water system of London, so it is an immense power. Now, again, I told you that I want to ask why academia and why Qatar. Let's compare Qatar with China. We also know that China paying big money to American universities, and this is why you hardly can hear or read any anti-China thing in the main newspapers in America. Now, one question is, who is paying more, Qatar or China, to American universities?
So in our research, we believe that Qatar is actually playing more than China. I think there's two issues. I think first of all, the universities in the United States is a huge business, and I think what I found in Washington is it's not just issues of anti-Semitism or anti-Israeli politics or the influence of Qatar. The universities have a lobby in Washington that's maybe one of the most powerful lobbies in the United States. And their goal is to ensure that higher education remains an unregulated part of the American economy. It's a huge industry, and they want money to flow to the universities from around the world. They want scholars to do research around the world. They want to bring students from around the world who pay foreign tuition fees, which are very high, and they want to be unregulated. And I think in our work and people concerned about anti-Semitism or the investment of anti-democratic, anti-American, homophobic, sexist, anti-Semites funding liberal education that we think is a problem, they don't want to be regulated by us. That's one. And they want the free flow of money. I think the issue of China politically in the United States is much more concerning to political leaders. They understand that the Chinese are not only investing money, but a lot of researchers and students come to American laboratories and they're stealing IP and bringing it to China. So I think politically, there's much more awareness and opposition to Chinese investment and participation in higher education than issues of anti-Semitism in Qatar. So
Now,
there is a way in China, I think.
okay, so I think that we have like two last questions, unfortunately. One question is, some people, not many people, say that what motivates China is the tendency or the will to destroy the West from within, and like Soviet tactics per se. And I think that what interesting me is what motivates Qatar. Maybe would you consider the main motivation for what Qatar is doing with all this money a religious motivation? Because many people say that the royal family is non-religious, okay? They're like playboys and etc. Is it this is a baya, the oath that they have? Because it seems to me they, I don't want to be harsh, but it seems to me that deep down they're not that religious in the doctrine of Islamic theology, and it may be something else. So, in your opinion, how do you view this?
So in my view, they adhere to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And we know from the Holy Land Foundation documentations, there were documents found from the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, from the FBI, and also Swiss police about 40 years ago, that showed that the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood is to, again, I've said this earlier, to distance Israel from the West, to weaken and destroy it, and then to use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States. The goal of the Muslim Brotherhood is to destroy the United States and to destroy democracy and replace it with a caliphate or Islamic law. And the leadership of Qatar has a spiritual oath to the Brotherhood and to this agenda. And yes, I think they're promoting an anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel agenda, and they are enemies of the West. And they, you know, on the one hand, they have the US military and they're funding universities and they're friends of the West. On the other hand, they adhere to this ideology. And I believe from our research and from our experts that we work with that they're very much committed to the Muslim Brotherhood strategic goals and worldview.
Wow. You know, you speak, and it's so unbelievable that the Israeli government chose Qatar to be the interrogator between Israel and Hamas, you know, and we had several episodes about Qatar, and it just unfathomable. I can't understand if the Israeli government knows what you know, and I think some parts of the Israeli government should know what you know, how this was even possible, you know, to take Qatar as the to let Qatar speak for the Israeli government with Hamas. It just beyond any reason.
Yeah, look, I think in a way, you know, in Israel, and Zionism was a movement to establish our homeland, but also this sort of a, you know, a movement away from the anti-Semitic world, and that Jews who live in the Galut or in the diaspora, they have to deal with anti-Semitism, but Israel doesn't. That if you come to Israel, you don't have to worry about anti-Semitism. And this was the ethos and the belief for generations in Israel. And anti-Semitism was somehow a problem for the weak shtetl Jews in the diaspora.
Mm.
And we've been arguing at ISGAP, and I know other scholars have been saying that actually anti-Semitism is exploding around the world, and it's not just a problem for the Jews in various communities around the world, but it's a strategic threat to the state of Israel and to democratic countries around the world. And I think after October the 7th, now people are realizing that this is really an issue for Israel and for the West, and that the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, we need to really take it very seriously and understand the minds of our enemy. And this is something that we've ignored in Israel, and I think in the West. But now I think there's more concern and more awareness, and people are beginning to ask these questions that you're asking. Yeah.
You can camouflage the word anti-Semitism with anti-Israel, anti-settlement, anti-Samaria, but the truth will eventually be revealed. And anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, no matter if you live in a shtetl in New Jersey or in the district of Tel Aviv. Professor Charles Small, thank you so much for your time. One thing that we hadn't had the time to discuss is who are our allies, who we need to cooperate with. Are there the conservative, the American conservatives, the European conservative, or we need go to Indian politics? Thank you so much for your effort, your time, and the, I think, very important work that you and ISGAP are doing. Thank you, thank you.
It's an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me.